Weddings are a lot of fun, but planning can be kind of tough. There are so many details to think about, and it's easy to forget what's really important along the way.
And if you've watched this series before, you'll have heard a lot of advice from us and from other wedding vendors about planning sustainable events. But we haven't yet heard from married couples themselves.
So this season, we've invited 4 recently married couples to a dinner party to chat about their wedding planning experience, the good, the bad, and everything in between. They'll sit down with our friend Sarah, an event planner here in Victoria, to chat about their own weddings and to share their insights.
Throughout the night, we'll be treated to deliciously scrappy appies and local libations. So let's sit around the table and talk about how to get you sustainably wed.
So, we have intentions, and I think once you have those in the planning process, the kind of next most invaluable thing a couple can do is get a community of like-minded vendors behind them and find the people who are going to be there and support you throughout the day and throughout the journey. And I know that I am lucky as a planner to know this incredible network of humans and 80 different photographers and 5 great videographers, but it's not really the case for couples, especially when you're just starting out. And I know finding a vendor who really understands you, maybe shares visions and values is important just in the process as well, but when it comes to creating a sustainable celebration, it can be really important, but can be really tough to find. So I'd love to hear more about what your process was like in picking the vendors or the humans, if they were, within your own sphere of influence for DIY. The humans or vendors that made your day possible, and how and where did you find these people? Simon and Ali, you had really a big sphere of influence, I think, and it's something we talk about couples with is, okay, who do you know? Who can we put to work? How did that crew come and bring things together?
Well, it was really nice having my brother and sister-in-law be involved in the wedding industry, so they helped us along with our, the most important vendor was the booze. Blanking on the names, but Derek and Lindsay. Yeah, they were lovely.
Okay, so you found Derek and Lindsay.
Yes. And their little beer cart thing that they had set up. We got pony kegs, all from, I think it was Hoyne. Yeah. And that just made the whole thing perfect.
Yeah. And Adam did the tarps because it was September, so we needed tarps to just in case it rained, which it did. And he put them all up, and
he had purchased I think it was 100-foot tarp for his wedding because he had his in September. There was risk of rain. Our whole backyard was covered by an enormous white tarp that we drilled into the side of trees and stuff.
Nice.
Having that service provided for free was also very nice.
You guys are well connected.
I think we're just lucky.
And I think it's surprising to some couples too when they sit down. It's like, oh, who do we know? What resources do we actually have at our disposal? I think that's a really good example of how maybe you don't have to look too far to find the people who are going to help you and align well because you already know and love them anyway.
Yeah.
That's super cool. Michael and Casey, I know you had some very important values and visions when it came to your own celebration and what that would look like, whether it was sustainability or inclusivity. Curious as to how you found those vendors and whether they did a good job reflecting that back to you.
Yeah, so I came across Bryan and Chelsea off on Instagram, and then I looked at their website. I was actually in the middle of doing an MBA in sustainable innovation, and then I came across their website. So it's a very value driven, picking both of them, and that's kind of how it all started. And then it was very small. We had family. Natalie, who was kind of in the industry.
And the venue, we were so focused on the venue because it allowed us to kind of omit so many things. We didn't have to decorate. We didn't, we didn't have to worry about food. We didn't have to worry about alcohol, although I would have liked to have sourced it myself. But when you're dealing with a larger venue like that. So once we had that, then the other pieces kind of came along. In the vendors, I had a friend of mine in Alberta who was a photographer, so she was our connection for that portion. Then Bryan and Chelsea came on, and then that just opened so many doors to the rest.
Yeah, so finding, maybe one set of vendors that you really connect with, and then finding out who they work with and what their, ideal team looks like to make it all cohesive on the day.
Absolutely, yeah, that's how it all started. they were quite instrumental, actually.
And seeing them as a team, I would not say I thought of that at the beginning. Like if I was to tell a couple now, like in the planning process, like building a team of vendors who are going to support you on the day of your wedding, I get that now, because looking back, they were there. They're with you the entire day. Yeah. There's this one specific moment where, Chelsea's like running into the Empress to be like, is the door open? We need to go in. Like things that are not that you're not expecting from your vendors who are, they are there for a certain service, and they're in some ways supporting the success of your event. That was huge.
Actually, you had something, right, with Chelsea on your wedding day? Or our wedding day?
The buttons on my dress were super finicky, and Chelsea helped button them up. So
Same with
they become friends, right?
Yeah. Our boutonnieres. She did
I just want to pause here and say that we definitely didn't bribe these couples to say nice things about us. We're so glad they had a great experience with us as videographers, but that's not why we invited them here today.
And
so stressed, like
our photographer put my veil in. Yeah, it's just those little moments where you're you just want people who feel like they're like friends.
Honestly, as a vendor, that's so good to hear, because we do this day in, day out, and we get to do this all the time, but we really do like to be present in the moment, and we consider ourselves a team on site. So it's very cool when you can see that perspective of, okay, a vendor's not just an afterthought. They're not just someone who's providing a service. It's not just a menu on a website. Yeah. It's the human who's going to be there with you that day and jump in and have an umbrella and fix your dress. And I think, coming back and relying on the professionals who do it day in, day out to help guide you from that path away from excess into an intention, so valuable. Speaking of intentions, I would intend to eat some food right now. Let's get some food.
The team at Mensch Catering provided the incredible dishes for our dinner party, and they did not disappoint. Chef Dan, his brother Michael, and their team prioritize using local and sustainable ingredients in really creative ways.
So the first dish that we're going to be featuring is going to be highlighting a daikon radish. This one I think is called a green lubo radish, grown at Square Root Farms in the Saanich Peninsula. Instead of the butter, we're using schmaltz, which is basically chicken fat. We're making a chicken fat emulsion that we call it schmaltz aioli. And the chicken fat we skim off of all of our stocks that we make in-house, and we save it, and we're using that for this dish, as well as some other things. But it's basically going to be the radish that we're going to process and poach, and then the schmaltz aioli on top, and a little bit of sea salt. So we do a lot of efforts in this kitchen to minimize our waste. For us, that looks like using products that would either end up in a bin, or maybe things like parsley stems that are used for stocks for the most part in other kitchens. We'll still use them for stocks occasionally, but we lacto ferment them, and we dehydrate them, and then we have a really awesome seasoning that we use. It's almost like a dill pickle flavor to it, so we use that in our kitchen to season fries along with many other things. We'll also make our own ferments with things like pepper seeds and trim. So for us, we try to find ways to use those things in here. So all that takes a lot of time, a lot of thought.
All right, what did we all think of that?
delicious. Yeah.
Cool. I think it's a really good jumping off point to talk about, vendors who do work sustainably, and food and drink can be one of the things that you look for to who sources local and what are they making it from and what kind of processes are they using. And I'm just curious as to whether any of you were thinking about sustainability when it came time to start looking for your vendors, and did sustainability even come up when you were talking with vendors?
I don't think it did, but I know that for a cake, for example, I would run into the owner and she would be picking up a flat of strawberries from a local farm. So I kind of knew just by peripherals that she was focusing on local. But our caterer, for example, we didn't really ask. We kind of just took it for granted. Right. Because they were so well known in the community at the time and had won so many awards. So we're well, they must be doing something right. And everyone loved the food, so that was the other thing. But in terms of sustainability, I think it was always kind of something in the background for us, considering how we both grew up. So we kind of just did our own research instead of asking the questions in the meetings. Plus it helped that I already worked with those people, so I already kind of knew what they were doing behind the scenes. And I mean, I think we hired our vendor team based on, would we hang out with them?
A very good metric. A very good metric.
More than the sustainability aspect.
So the sustainability came after kind of naturally.
Yeah, and I think it was like something that was like in the background, not something that we were like focusing on, and we were like, it's going to be an end-all be-all if they're not sustainable.
Right.
Yeah.
Wasn't a deal breaker. And I think that's actually a really good point, is that when we talk about sustainability, it doesn't have to be a be-all, end-all, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can very much be meeting you where you're at and where you can. I know for your journey as a couple, you brought people in from a lot of different places, which is maybe less sustainable, but the vendors you ended up working with, it sounds like, had some sustainable practices in place anyways, whether it was Twist, or did those conversations come up in your booking?
Not explicitly, no. Yeah. And so it just was a really nice byproduct, I think, of some of the vendors that we were working with, but it wasn't sort of super top of mind. We're really glad in hindsight that happened to work out, where we knew that they were sustainable, getting like ingredients and things locally.
Honestly, what I'm hearing is that as vendors, we can do a better job of talking about it and bringing it to the forefront. But at the same time, I think it's kind of cool that you all ended up with some of these factors that were sustainable. And that wasn't even the reason why you picked it. It was because they were really good. And I think that dispels maybe some of the myth about, sustainable is less or sustainable is basic. It's like, no, it's just a way of life. And honestly, people who are doing really cool high-end things are probably doing it locally too. So I think that's really neat. So when you were looking for vendors, and then when you actually went about booking them, if you were going to do this again, maybe you're not getting married again, but let's say we're having a great anniversary party, celebrating round 2. Is there anything y'all would have done differently?
We would not have spray painted pineapples.
You spray painted pineapples?
We did. I feel like that is like the least sustainable thing we could have done.
Why did you spray paint pineapples?
It was part of the theme. It was a tropical theme, escape to the tropics in October.
Fair. And I guess you are a vendor yourself, so that makes sense. So as a vendor, you would have... For the vendors you picked though, was there anything you would have changed, or maybe other questions you would have asked?
I think I would have asked where the orchids came from. I think I assumed, because I had taken a floral boot camp class with the florist, I assumed that they were coming from the island. So of course they're gonna be grown in a greenhouse, which isn't great, but I didn't full on ask those questions about where they're coming from. So I think just more questions.
More questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. Anyone else, or any other maybe criteria, now that you're hearing what things have been discussed, that you would have maybe been looking for when you started the vendor hunt?
I think the outcome probably would have been the same, just in terms of the vendors that we ended up with. But yeah, I agree. Asking more questions and just being more intentional would be something that I would change about the process.
Yeah.
I think we'd probably, we'd end up with the same result, but yeah.
For sure, you chose well.
Yeah, that's great.
That's awesome. And curious, looking back, we've touched on this a little bit, but how did personalities for vendors come into play, and who did you end up spending the most time with?
That's a good question.
We spent a lot of time with our photo video team.
Yeah,
and we very intentionally picked them because our photographer, I went to high school with her, and our videographer as well. They're great, and we wouldn't be here if they weren't.
And Simon and Ali, you used your sphere of influence really heavily. Would you change that going back, or were you like, heck yes?
Our efficient. And somebody said, would we hang out with these people?
Yes.
And absolutely.
Nice.
Everyone we chose was like, oh, I'd invite them to a party for sure. Our efficient was the coolest for sure.
Nice.
And photographer, also a friend, videographer, friend. The only stranger we hired was the efficient, and she became a friend.
A friend?
Yeah.
That's the mark of a good
cool.
event.
Absolutely.
When everyone feels like friends afterwards.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Some of us are friends afterwards. We hang out with our planner all the time.
Hey, as vendors, we love that.
Yeah, Alana was literally like, "Oh, like, do you think they'll remember us if when this is over?"
Is it weird if we're like, "Do you want to hang out?"
Okay, as a planner, I'm always like, can we be friends afterwards? And I'm like, am I being weird?
Is this crossing a boundary? But I don't really care. Yeah, good personality.
So asking more questions, maybe a bit more intentful, but it's also hard to know when you haven't done a wedding before. You know, all these things that you are realizing now and acknowledging that you wouldn't have thought to ask about. Is there any advice that you would give to couples now who are looking to go a little bit more sustainable? Or would you just have liked more guidance from vendors in general?
I feel like there should be like a toolkit where one could say, okay, I'm inviting so many people from out of town, for example. I'm doing certain things on my own. We're choosing, you know, this vendor that's a little bit proximity that could help you sort of make that decision, informed decision about how sustainable is this event. Because really, ultimately, that's the question, is that there are so many different decisions along the way that can make it sustainable. And then you're deciding, well, what am I choosing sustainability, or am I choosing, you know, what's going to make this event feel right for me?
So Casey's actually really onto something here. And while this isn't 100% of what he's talking about, there actually already is a fantastic tool called the Wedding Footprint Calculator that helps you estimate the overall carbon and waste footprint of your wedding. Developed in Australia by a group called Mindfully Wed, this calculator allows you to input many of the wedding day variables, like outfits, travel, rentals, food, and more. And then you receive an estimated carbon footprint score. So you can review and revise your decisions with this knowledge in mind. It's definitely worth checking out. Okay, back to our conversation.
Yeah, I think too, if the couple can't, because it's probably, you know, the very few times they've planned a wedding, to have any vendor who's aware of this concept guide a conversation around what that means for the couple, and then the individuals within the couples, and then try to find that compromise as you will when you plan your wedding. Yeah, and everything. Yeah,
Totally.
Yeah, because you don't even know what kind of things you don't know that you should be aware of. And I don't think there's right or wrong. There are trade-offs. And so to have a guided discussion of what is meaningful to you as the individual and as the couple, then you'll come to an outcome that will feel good for you, even if you're not going to perfectly hit every index or metric of sustainability.
It's exactly that, right? And I think what I'm hearing you saying is that you want people who are going to meet you where you're at and maybe help you get a little bit a step forward, a little bit more sustainable, or whatever other goals and metrics you're planning around as well, like bringing family and how can we make this really personal or really love-filled, but having someone there to guide. And
that's where it's important for vendors to be value-based, you know, and make it very clear. I think that's why we picked Paper Heart, because it was like very clear what their values were and their goals and how that matched what we wanted, and the conversations can then ensue and follow.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, and it helps break through some of that hype maybe, you know, like just because someone's won awards or has a lot of Instagram followers doesn't actually speak to the final product or what y'all are going to experience on the day. So I think values, and that's where my own, honestly, sustainability practice came from, is our ethos is kindness, and kindness to everyone and kindness to the local community, and then in turn the environment. It just makes sense. It's a really good point.
I wanted to add, though, I also feel like the education as well, it's coming more and more out, but like if vendors themselves aren't educated on what the sustainability swaps are, then it's hard to guide a couple in that direction too. Like for example, like if you're a florist that only works with floral foam and you don't have any alternatives and your couple's asking you, then that could be like a reason that maybe the couple doesn't know any better, or that they work with somebody else.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of onus on vendors, but I would encourage all couples to keep speaking up and ask those questions and bring to us what's important and who you are, and let us jump in and help guide for the rest of that.
Having that sense of awareness, I think, is really important. I think that could be just like the step one in terms of moving towards the sustainability. I think it's hard to have it 100% perfect. I think that's also a key to remember when you're planning a wedding. Like you can't, it has to be balanced. That's the whole concept of sustainability, balancing things out, not just because like you have to be 100% recyclable or like it's a give and take. That's the whole I think one of the concepts, is, to me anyways, that's how I define sustainability too, is balance. Like,
and that's where we come back to our priorities, right? Because what is a sustainable and good decision for one couple is going to be so different for the next, and it all depends on what's important to you and where you are and where you're headed. And to me, like, sustainability is more than just a checklist of here's the tips that you can do and use this kind of paper, but more a mindset and a challenge of, okay, let's consider this in the whole. I think that's great. This has been super valuable, even just as a vendor, but hopefully for couples as well, as they start on that journey to find the people who are going to be there with them on their biggest day. Love that. Cool. Yay, guys, 2 episodes done.